Okay, hi everyone, this is Conscious Truth again, and I am making this long-awaited video about Atlantis. I'm going to give you a full download of my view on what Atlantis is, means, was, ancient Egypt, what it means, and the current paradigm that we're in, and how it all ties together. So it might be a bit of a long-winded video. Try and stick through it if you can. It's going to be kind of fun to get through all this information, because I've been wanting to make this video for a long time. And there's a lot of information to cover, so I'll start from the beginning. A lot of people think of Atlantis as being this lost continent under the sea. Okay, for starters, I don't really use the word Atlantis like that. To me, Atlantis is more the name that I like to give to the ancient global civilization, because at the times when they were building the pyramids, they were doing that all over the world. Actually, yeah, I didn't get a picture of South America, but obviously in South America they were building pyramids. They were in China and Egypt, of course. So this was a global civilization that had very high technology, and you know, I'm just going to spell it out the way it is. You know, you're free to disagree with this opinion if you want, but I'm just going to say it the way I see it. Okay, and it's not just me. I mean, lots of other people think of this as well. So, you know, to be able to build these types of structures, personally, I would go as far as to say that they would have needed computers, because this is, with today's technology, I've seen engineers. There's plenty of videos if you search on the internet. There's engineers and there's stonemasons who say that if we were to build this today, we would only just about be able to maybe get it as accurately built as that. So we use computers today to build everything and to measure everything. So clearly they must have had computers as well, and high technology and machines. As you can see with stone cutting, they obviously had power tools. These kind of things are impossible to make without power tools. So here we are. This is the Sphinx and the pyramids, the Great Pyramid of Giza. Personally, I believe that this face of the Sphinx is an African-looking female, and I think she may have been one of the first human beings on the Earth, like Eve, and possibly all our genetics come from this person. It's quite an amazing, special place. I think that the story of the Ark comes from here. I think this is where the genetic codes, many of the species of the Earth were somehow created or preserved in this area by these people who had very high technology. So what we're talking about with Atlantis is a global civilization. It spanned the whole world and had different groups. Obviously, in South America, they were a slightly different group of people. But funnily enough, the Olmec heads look very similar to the Sphinx. They look very African type looking face, and they're in South America, and they also built pyramids. Got a few pictures here of the Sphinx. Here's some people on top of the Great Pyramid. It's a pretty amazing picture. So clearly whoever built these had extremely high technology, They had computers. They probably had some kind of levitation, anti-gravity machines, very high technology computers. They would have had, cars, buildings, flying machines. Imagine, that this city was a very, very modern place, like a modern city you see today. This is an old picture of the Sphinx. You can see the very, very kind of African style features of the face. And here, there's a very old drawing of the Sphinx. It looks very feminine. And so I imagine Atlantis would have been something a bit like this. If you find this hard to believe, imagine if there was a huge disaster on Earth today and civilization was kind of wiped out. Imagine in, say, 50 or 100,000 years, how many remnants do you think would be left of our civilization after 100,000 years? Especially if you were under the ocean, if there was a big flood. Do you think your computers would survive 100,000 years under the sea? Or any type of anything? Books, discs, USB discs? No, they would all decompose and rot away. There'd be nothing left. The only thing that would be left would be stuff made of stone. Like this. Okay. So I know it's difficult to imagine that the people that built the pyramids were driving around in cars and had computers and stuff, but if there was a huge flood which covered the whole world, say, and it happened, maybe these things were built, 50,000 years ago, I don't think there'd be a lot of those computers left. Unless, of course, they were inside the pyramid. So imagine a world a bit like this, that spanned the whole world. For some reason, this is just showing how they used computers to build some statues. Here's another image of a high-tech ancient world. So, for whatever reason, this civilization was completely destroyed. Now, this could have been due to war, or it could have been a natural disaster. I tend to think that it was probably more likely a war. I think that maybe some groups began fighting and they had extremely powerful weapons. They had a war. At some point, one of these super weapons triggered some kind of giant tsunami and wiped out everything. And a few people survived. I haven't shown the maps, but anyway, I think that there were different groups that survived, and these were obviously groups who were not getting along. Obviously, if there was a war, there were different groups that survived who were fighting each other. I think one of these groups ended up going towards Northern Europe and ended up evolving into the secret traditions of the Freemasons and the Magi and the how would you say, who we draw our Hermetic tradition from, things like the tarot and Hermetic magic and such things, was from that line of ancestry. And then I think there was another group that went towards Rome. So anyway, let's just go back in time. Okay, going a bit too far forward. So basically, the Atlantis was destroyed. Ancient Egypt was destroyed. There's a lot of misconception about Egypt, who was in charge. The hieroglyph drawings that you see on lots of the tombs and stuff like that are much later, and a lot of the statues and stuff are much later, and a lot of what Egyptologists tell us about supposedly ancient Egypt is much later. They talk about a period of time, 2000 BC, which they talk about Cheops and stuff, but the pyramids date probably most probably back more like 50,000 BC. So you're talking about a huge, vast amount of time. And those people who, the Pharaonic Egypt, is what people call it, the different dynasties, were not really anything to do with this ancient Atlantean people. You're talking like much later. And they were people who just basically moved in to Egypt after it had been destroyed and tried to pick up the pieces and just took over. It ended up with Romans moving in at the end, like Cleopatra. Before that, there were Arab type of groups who took over, and that's why most of the ancient what they call ancient Egyptian, but the Pharaonic Egyptian, hieroglyphic paintings and stuff were basically Arab tribes and groups who took over much later. They didn't really understand the technology. They'd lost the technology at that point. They'd lost the ability to use the technology, and they were just sort of trying to hang on to these ancient temples and use them to as just, like rulers move in, they find some big buildings, they take over, say, oh, look at me, I've got this big building, blah, 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 blah. They didn't understand what any of it was for. They didn't understand the technology. They didn't understand anything. And that just got worse and worse and worse towards the point where the Romans came in, like Cleopatra. There she is. And apparently Cleopatra. And at that point, they'd completely lost touch with the Atlantean technology. It was lost forever. There were maybe some people that knew something, but they were dispersed all over the place. Okay, and then obviously the Romans evolved into the Roman Catholic Empire. So here you have in the Vatican some Egyptian relics. I don't know what these look like, kind of Roman Egyptian relics to me. But the point I was trying to make by showing this is that the Vatican have had a very, very big hand to play in controlling ancient Egyptian sites. They were very deeply involved with the Egyptian Office of Antiquities, and quite often when tombs were opened and stuff, people from the Vatican would show up and they would confiscate stuff. So they've got their Vatican archives. This is in a Vatican museum, for instance. And almost certainly there are high technology. I think that the Vatican are holding on to very, very high tech stuff that they found. If they haven't found it yet, then they don't want you to find it, or they don't want you to know about it. But possibly they have found it and they're keeping it secret. Who knows? Maybe this is another reason why they're having all these wars in Syria and Iraq and stuff. It's because they're looking for something. That's just kind of speculation as well. But I personally believe that there are actually computers still operating inside the Great Pyramid. Here's some more Egyptian artifacts in the Vatican. And here's the Vatican Obelisk. Shows they obviously have obsession with ancient Egypt. Here it is, right in the center of the Vatican. And here is a statue of the pineal gland, and then I've put that there because the pineal gland has since ancient times represented the spiritual part of the brain, because the pine cone, the pineal gland, gets its name from pine cone, and it's quite strange to see a giant pine cone in the Vatican. But it's not strange when you understand why it's there. Pineal gland apparently is a little gland here in the brain. It looks a bit like a pine cone. And here you have different representations. Pine cone Buddha, pine cone from some Masonic thing, Vatican and Sumerian. Pine cone is the symbol of the eye, the third eye, or the spiritual eye. Now, why have I gone off on a tangent about that? Because the Vatican are in the business of mind controlling humanity. They obviously have the knowledge, a lot of the knowledge of Atlantis and what happened and who we are and where we came from, but they don't want you to know about it. So in that sense, they are controlling your mind and they're controlling your spiritual state, because they don't want you to know about your ancient history. The people who built the pyramids and who built Atlantis were a spiritual society, and they had a harmonious spiritual way of life and very high technology. But the Vatican doesn't want you to know that. They want you to be their slave. So that's why these weird freaks like this guy wave a stick around with a corpse hanging from it. And they're all basically homosexual freaks. The pyramid, it has very high technology surrounding it. The shafts that go into the pyramid are actually, I believe that if you want to access the computers in the Great Pyramid, that you probably would want to send a signal, like Wi-Fi signal. That might sound silly to some people, but obviously, you know, if any type of a race, look, put it like this, okay? Let's propose that these people that built this must have had computers. I personally think they must have had computers. Okay, do you think they would have built these huge buildings which were designed to last forever and to resist all types of weather and disaster and earthquakes and stuff? Do you think they would not have hidden a computer in there for future civilizations to access? And do you think they would not have made it so that you couldn't just easily break in and steal it and break it? Do you think, maybe there was one in the king's chamber, maybe it was taken. Do you think they would have just put one in there in a really obvious place? Do you think they wouldn't have put another one maybe somewhere else where it would be very difficult to access, like up here, for instance? And then, do you think radio signals? Do you think maybe these passages maybe could be access points, radio signals? You could send a signal down these tunnels to access the computer. So if you sent different frequencies down and you bounce them off, a bit like a pay wave, a credit card, RFID chip, it bounces a signal back. So if you were to send a signal down these tunnels and you span through every single frequency range and see if you got a signal back, you could then actually design a computer program to translate the data. That's something that I'd like to work on. So this guy doesn't want you to know about any of this because he wants you to worship him like a god, and neither does this guy either. That's a face you can trust, and that's a face, well, I don't think you'd trust either of those people really, unless you're crazy. And there's nothing strange going on here. This is not strange at all. This is the Queen of England, dressed in black, as if she's going to a funeral, the first time she met the Pope. Nothing to see here, very strange, nothing strange about this at all. People that think that the Vatican doesn't have any power. Why do you think the Queen has to put on a special black dress when she meets him? Why do you think she has to put on this special black dress? Because he says so. Because she works for him. And look at these weird guys in the background. Do these look like nice people? Does he look like a nice person to you? Would you let this guy babysit your children, or him, or him? Does she look happy? And does he look like someone you trust? No. So anyway, this is the situation we're in. These people are sitting on all of the ancient knowledge of Atlantis, but they're too stupid to understand what to do with it. Anyway, this is the real reality that we're in. We are spiritual beings, and we live in a spiritual reality. What exactly happened in Atlantis is still a bit of a mystery. It is possible that people came here from another world and helped us to build that, or even, people speculate that people came from other worlds to help us build these things, but I still think that actually it was just us. I don't think it was anyone else. I think it was us, and however hard it seems to believe, I think that we actually wiped ourselves out in a war. I mean, it's not as if it hasn't happened before. Look at how the Roman Empire fell. Look at the Second World War. Civilizations have wiped themselves out, and it's stupid to pretend that they haven't, because they have. Our true spiritual divine nature. Okay, that about wraps it up. If I think of anything else, I'll do a part 2 video. Good night.